Somewhere in South Africa, underneath thousands of years of collapsed stone and dust, archaeologists dug down and found something that shouldn't have been there at all. A bed. Not a pile of leaves someone collapsed onto after a long day. A built, layered, deliberately engineered mattress, taken apart and rebuilt again and again, generation after generation. And pressed into the very top layer, specific leaves, chosen on purpose, that modern chemists have since confirmed contain natural insect-repelling compounds. Whoever built that bed had no microscope, no laboratory, no word for chemistry, and no way to explain what a compound even was. And yet they had already solved a problem it would take modern science tens of thousands of years to catch up to. Sit with that for a second, because it gets stranger from here. This is not even close to the most surprising thing ancient humans figured out, just to survive one ordinary night. The further archaeologists and anthropologists dig into how early humans actually lived, the more one uncomfortable truth keeps rising to the surface. They were not simply enduring a hostile world, waiting for it to end. They were quietly, methodically outsmarting it, one impossible problem at a time, using nothing but observation, memory, and a level of patience most of us will never be forced to develop. By the end of this video, you will never picture ancient humans the same way again. The bed that fought back. The cave is called Sibudu, cut into a cliff face in South Africa, and the archaeologist who uncovered what was hiding inside it, Lynn Wadley, wasn't expecting to find sophistication buried in the dirt. What her team pulled out instead were compressed layers of reeds and rushes, rebuilt over and over across generations, almost like a mattress somebody kept quietly renovating every time it wore through. Laid across the very top, in the layer closest to where people actually slept, were leaves from a specific tree, one known today to repel mosquitoes and other biting insects. Nobody wrote any of this down. Nobody sketched a diagram or passed around a manual. Someone simply noticed, one itch-covered, sleepless night at a time, that a particular leaf changed everything. And they remembered it clearly enough to pass it down to their children, who passed it down to theirs. That single detail should already break the picture you have of ancient life in your head. But keeping insects away while you slept, it turns out, was the easy version of this problem. Because elsewhere, in that same era, ancient humans were facing a far more terrifying version of the exact same question. How do you close your eyes for the night, knowing something out there is fully capable of ending your life before morning comes? Sleeping above the thing that wants to eat you. Imagine lying down to sleep with the knowledge that a leopard, powerful enough to kill you in seconds without any warning at all, might be moving through the exact same patch of ground beneath you right now. In parts of ancient Africa and Southeast Asia, humans didn't just accept that risk. They engineered around it, raised sleeping platforms, built into trees, or propped high above the forest floor, took the fight completely out of a predator's reach. Picture it. A frame lashed together in the branches, hides stretched across it, a family lying still in the dark, while something below moves through the undergrowth, circles once, and eventually gives up. It sounds almost too simple to be impressive, until you sit with what it actually demanded. Someone had to study that animal closely enough to know precisely how high it could climb, exactly how much distance was enough to matter, and then build something strong enough to bet their life on, every single night, for years. That was not fear driving a random decision. That was calculated engineering, aimed with surgical precision at one specific weakness in one specific predator. But even a group finally safe from claws overhead still faced a threat with no teeth at all, and absolutely no mercy either. What happens when the entire landscape around you simply stops giving you anything to drink? Finding water where there is no water. In the driest stretches of the Kalahari Desert, water can vanish completely from the surface for months at a stretch. And still, people didn't just pass through this land searching for somewhere better. They lived here, generation after generation, inside a landscape that seemingly offered nothing at all. The San people cracked it in a way that sounds almost like a magic trick the first time you hear it explained. Cleaned ostrich eggshells, refilled with water, sealed tight, and buried at specific locations scattered across the desert, sometimes years before that water would ever be needed, marked only by memory and landmarks nobody else would ever notice. An egg becomes a canteen. The desert float becomes a refrigerator. A person's memory becomes a map with no lines, no ink, and no way to lose it in a fire or a flood. Other groups read the land in a completely different way, watching which birds circled overhead, which insects gathered where, which grazing patterns pointed toward moisture hidden far beneath the surface. This wasn't guessing, this was pattern recognition sharpened across decades. Because getting it wrong in that landscape didn't mean discomfort, it meant not making it home at all. Water kept people alive long enough to hunt, but some of what ancient humans did next, to make sure that hunt actually succeeded, is stranger and far more calculated than almost anyone expects. The poison nobody saw coming. At Border Cave, also in South Africa, researchers pulled a wooden applicator stick out of the ground, nearly 24,000 years old, still coated in the chemical residue of poison. Traditions still practiced by San hunters today use a version of the exact same idea, sourced from the larvae of specific beetles, carefully harvested and applied directly to arrow tips. A wound that a healthy animal could otherwise survive for hours suddenly became fatal within minutes. Now picture what it actually took to arrive at that formula and live to use it. Someone first had to notice a creature that caused sickness. Someone then had to test it deliberately, at real and immediate personal risk, and survive long enough afterward to describe exactly how they'd done it, so the next person wouldn't have to relearn the same lesson by dying. That is not campfire folklore. That is dangerous, deliberate experimentation, refined across generations into something reliable enough to trust with an entire family's next meal. But once a hunt like that actually worked, an entirely different problem appeared almost immediately. What do you do with an animal far too large for any shelter you already own? A house made out of the thing you just ate. Picture the middle of an ice age winter, somewhere in what is now Ukraine, roughly 15,000 years ago. Wind rakes across an open, treeless plain with nothing left standing to slow it down. There is no timber for miles in any direction, because the cold killed these forests off long ago. And rising out of that frozen emptiness, unmistakable against the white horizon, is a dome. Not stone, not wood, bone. Skulls, dozens of them, stacked with a structural logic that still impresses engineers who study it today, forming the base of the wall like foundation blocks laid by hand. Long curved tusks arched overhead, locked together like the ribs of some impossible creature turned inside out to become shelter instead of a body. Hides pulled tight across every gap, sealing the wind out, trapping warmth in. Step closer and picture a fire glowing at the center, smoke curling upward through a gap left on purpose in the bone above. Shadows sliding across walls built entirely from an animal larger than the house itself. Somewhere inside, children asleep against a wall that was once a living, breathing giant. This is Meserich, and sites just like it. Real, excavated, documented. A structure so precisely engineered that some of these dwellings appear to have been used, repaired, and lived in for centuries. None of this happened by accident, and none of it was decoration. A single mammoth could provide literal tons of meat, enough fat to fuel weeks of fires, and hide enough to clothe an entire group. Once every bit of that had been used completely, the skeleton itself became the last resource still standing, in a place where nothing else was left to build with. Understanding how to distribute that much weight, how to resist wind screaming across an open plain with nothing to break it, how to keep a structure standing through an entire ice age winter using only the remains of one enormous animal. That is not survival by luck, that is architecture, born entirely out of necessity, thousands of years before anyone ever wrote down the word engineering. And keeping a shelter like that livable through the coldest months depended on something people guarded even more closely than the walls surrounding them. The flame that traveled with you. Starting fire completely from nothing, using only friction or sparks struck carefully from stone, could take real time, real effort, and absolutely no guarantee it would work. So instead of gambling on starting over every single time, ancient humans landed on something far smarter. They carried fire with them. Evidence from multiple archaeological sites, along with the well-known 5,000-year-old body known as Utsi the Iceman, shows people transporting a very specific slow-burning material, a fungus now nicknamed horsehoof fungus, capable of smoldering quietly for extended stretches without needing to be constantly fed. Wrapped carefully, shielded from wind and rain, a single glowing coal could survive an entire journey lasting days. Somewhere inside every group, one single person carried the responsibility for an entire population's warmth, quite literally in their hands. If that coal died in a sudden storm, the whole group could go without reliable fire for a long, dangerous stretch afterward. And the moment that ember finally reached the next camp, it wasn't only used to keep people warm, it solved a completely different, quietly urgent problem waiting on the other side of every successful hunt. Smoke as an ancient refrigerator. Long before anyone understood bacteria, ancient humans understood something just as useful in practice. Meat and fish hung over smoke for extended periods lasted far longer than anything simply left out in open air. Smoke slowly draws the moisture out of meat while coating the surface in compounds that happen to resist the very bacteria responsible for spoilage, stretching what should have been a few usable days into weeks, sometimes months. Nobody understood the microbiology behind any of it. Somebody simply noticed that the smoked meat from the previous season hadn't gone bad and did exactly the same thing again. Food science, reverse engineered through nothing but watching, remembering, and repeating. But not every season ended in a successful hunt, and when it didn't, ancient humans had a fallback most people today would refuse to even consider: the famine food nobody talks about. When hunting failed and stored food finally ran out, insects became the difference between starvation and survival. Grubs, termites, locusts, all remarkably calorie-dense, and all dramatically easier to gather reliably than an animal fully capable of simply running away. Entomophagy, the practice of eating insects, shows up across ancient archaeological sites and living traditional communities on nearly every continent, and it was never a desperate act taken without a plan. In many groups, it functioned as a genuinely dependable, well-understood calorie source, held quietly in reserve for exactly the moment larger game turned scarce. That is not desperation. That is a backup survival system, built in advance, waiting patiently for the day it would actually be needed. And once a group survived a brutal season using knowledge like this, they faced one final challenge, arguably the hardest one covered in this entire video. How do you make absolutely certain the next generation never has to relearn any of it the hard way? The story that remembers where the water is. Among Aboriginal Australian communities, certain traditional song lines, memorized chains of story, song, and landmark, have been studied by researchers and found to encode genuinely accurate geographic information, some of it apparently preserved across many thousands of years. Specific songs describe specific paths across specific landscapes, exactly where water reliably collects, which routes are safest, which areas to avoid entirely, passed down accurately, generation after generation, without a single word ever written anywhere. This is not folklore in the dismissive sense people so often assume. This is a functioning information storage system, using rhythm and melody specifically because they are remembered far more reliably than plain instruction ever could be on its own. In the right hands, a story was every bit as valuable and every bit as life-saving as a map. What this actually means: insect-resistant bedding, elevated shelters built to outsmart predators far stronger than any human, buried water hidden inside eggshells years before it was ever needed, poison refined through repeated, genuinely dangerous trial, an entire house built from the bones of the very animal that fed the group who built it, fire carried gently across days of travel so it never had to be built from nothing again, smoke used as an ancient form of refrigeration, insects treated as a calculated emergency food supply, not a last resort, and songs used as memory maps, precise enough to save a life thousands of years after they were first sung around a fire. None of it happened by accident. Every single one of these methods demanded patient observation, real and immediate danger, and the discipline to remember exactly what worked and repeat it across generations without a single modern tool to lean on. Picture that cave in South Africa one final time. That family lying down for the night on bedding built with quiet, deliberate intelligence. Completely unaware, they were practicing a form of applied science that chemists would only fully understand tens of thousands of years later. They were never primitive. They were relentlessly resourceful, running the only laboratory ever available to them, which was the world itself, and refusing, again and again, across 300,000 years, to accept that it had already won. Every method in this video exists because of one simple, stubborn fact. Somebody, somewhere, refused to die quietly. They tested, they failed, they buried their dead and kept going anyway. And they passed down exactly what they learned, so the next generation wouldn't have to start from nothing. That refusal is the reason their knowledge survived long enough to reach us. Tens of thousands of years later, we are still living with the solutions they discovered. If uncovering the hidden intelligence of ancient human life is something you want to keep exploring, consider subscribing and leave a comment telling us which one of these survival methods shocked you the most. Those answers are always the most interesting part of making these videos.